Well, don't you, Kenneth, or haven't I told you, every telling has a tailing, and that's the he and the she of it. Look, the dusk is growing. My branches lofty are taking root, and my cold chair's gone ashly. Feel-oo. What age is that? It soon is late. 'Tis endless now since I one last saw Waterhouse's clock. They took it asunder, I heard them sigh. When will they reassemble it? Oh, my back. I'd want to go to Aixley Fames. Ping, pang. There's the bell for sexolitis. At Concepta they send the spray. Pang. Bring out the clothes, ring in the dew. God of Ari, vert the showers, and grant thy grace. Amen. Will we spread them here now? Aye, we will. Flip, spread on your bank, and I'll spread mine on mine. Flap. It's what I'm doing. Spread. It's turning chill, their went is rising. Stones on the hostel sheets, a man and his bride embrace between them, else I'd have folded and sprinkled them only. And I'll tie my butcher's apron here. It's suety yet, the strollers will pass it by. 6 shifts, 10 kerchiefs, 9 to hold to the fire, and 1 for the code. The convent napkins 12, 1 baby shawl. Could Mother Joseph? No, she said. Who said? Mother Snow.
Hello, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumburger channel. Show where we talk about all sorts of different albums, kinds of music, yada yada. And so in today's episode, we're going to continue our sporadic mini-series covering the many different works of the one and only Steve Roden. And so we've covered forms of paper on the channel before, as well as discussing the incredibly beautiful Stars of Ice for our 2023 Christmas episode. But today, I think we're going to be discussing what is actually a rather short composition for Steve Roden. This is a very short little one to listen to on Bandcamp, but I think this will be popular amongst the fans of the soundscapes that Forms of Paper brings, kind of a different exploration of maybe similar concepts, maybe, sort of, I don't know. Today I present Reading Without Reading Within. And so, of course, having a dive into Reading Without Reading Within, a very unusual composition by Steve Roden, sourced and inspired by the book Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce, which I've got here. Though, to be fair, it's not really inspired by the book as such, but rather being sourced from a recording of author James Joyce reading from his own novel here. And so considering the vastness of so many of Roden's compositions, Reading Without Reading Within genuinely sounds so short by comparison, and yet it's an incredibly engrossing little composition. You get all those typical Roden micro sounds that are slowly murmuring, bubbling and fizzing away, travelling across the sound spectrum in all the different channels that creates this absurdly immersive little soundscape. What's interesting is there's a peculiar sense of momentum happening here. And I find it rather bizarre to hear, but it's so interesting that so many disparate elements from the sources of these very sounds to the processes of it all, to the creative endeavour from Roden's end, it all comes across as inaccessible and peculiar, and yet by just letting this kind of music occur, it is incredibly rewarding in its own right. It's genuinely such an odd little lowercase drone made from a very unusual source, but we're talking about the guy who made compositions from paper amongst many other everyday objects as well. So it shouldn't really be a surprise, and yet listening to about, just about any composition from Rodin always reveals this treasure trove of such unbridled creativity in the presentation of experimental sounds, presented to us as these truly immersive little compositions, right? And so it's always worth asking, what's happening on this recording then? And so, like with forms of paper, reading without, reading within is another composition from Rodin where the process and description is what drew me into the soundscape. The Bandcamp page for the track, does explain everything more or less, but it's on Rodin's website In Between Noise that we find much more of the answers for what is happening here. And so Reading Without Reading Within was a multimedia presentation from Rodin combining physical art pieces with the very composition itself, which was exhibited first in Podewil, Berlin, Germany in 1999, sorry. And then again in the Gartschack Bergamot Station, Santa Monica in 2000. And as you know with me, I always like to read what information is provided to us, so it's worth reading the information, the text provided on In Between Noise, as it gives us the context we need for this particular little composition. And as follows: the piece was inspired by hearing a recording of James Joyce speaking a fragment of Finnegan's Wake. The sound was composed using fragments of Joyce's voice that were edited, looped, and electronically transformed via guitar pedals and other analog electronics, while the soundscape was made up of audible words. The processing allowed the words to disintegrate into a kind of pure sound or sound beyond words and voice. The idea was to imbue an already difficult to understand text to unfold into pure abstraction. The drawings were also made in relation to Finnegan's Wake, generally conversing with a specific characteristic of a page in an attempt to make a drawing for every page of the book, which I did not complete. Basically, a drawing would be made based on an agreement with a page, such as drawing circles on the paper in relation to the placement of every letter O was found on the page, or tracing the shapes of the paragraphs, or reading a page out loud while making a continuous mark or line on the paper. It was an early approach to working with text as scores and trying to allow a source to ignite a kind of rigorous play, which seemed quite relevant to the text. And so I find this one genuinely fascinating from Rodin, as I find so many things fascinating, to be fair. And we get a lot of understanding of so much of this composition, which is, to me, I'm going to say, I think it's one of Rodin's more underrated little tracks within, his incredibly vast experimental discography. To be fair, there's probably going to be so many more to discover. But what I find interesting is, without context, listening to this entire composition would result in hearing this lowercase electronic little music that pushes along for 13 minutes. You might end up assuming that it's merely an expression of electronic droning elements, blips, glitches, and it would certainly be a satisfying composition nonetheless. But it is with this context, that we understand so much more of what's going on under the surface than simply what is being heard. The soundscape soars from the very voice of James Joyce himself, reading from one of the most esoteric works of fiction ever conceived, I feel. And what starts out as, legible speech in terms of the original recording of James Joyce's voice, turns into this garbled lowercase drone, rendering it to something completely incomprehensible. But there's a further fascination, though, with the fact that I've mentioned, Finnegan's Wake being a rather incomprehensible book. Even hearing the original audio of James Joyce reading from this book, which we used in the very opening of this episode, actually, what is literally being said is so incomprehensible. Like, you just hear him and it's just like he's babbling away. And as a result, Rodin's drawn upon that to create this very abstract experimental work that is inspired by this whole concept of illegibility and just distorting it into noise, essentially. And I find it delightful. I really find it delightful, weird but delightful, that Rodin expresses this text and voices as something so much more abstract and difficult to understand. And it becomes one of those weird little things that constantly plays over onto itself the more you think about it, you know, constantly reflecting what it once was and what it is simultaneously, if that makes sense, which is very unusual. And so to mention just a bit more, I mentioned I was drawn to this particular album by Rodan due to having read about it being sourced from Joyce reading from his novel Finnegan's Wake. And this is a book at this point in time. I'm currently trying to read my way through this, but it is, you know, this is an even bigger melon twister than the books of Thomas Pynchon, no doubt, I would say. But to be fair though, reading what I've read of this book so far and stuff, I have this really weird fascination with Finnegan's Wake, as it comes across to me as this incredibly strange esoteric novel beyond comprehension at times. And so much that you just have to let your mind just naturally flow with its prose. If you can even call it prose, I guess. And it amazes me, though, that Rodan was, you know, also fascinated by this very strange book to the point of utilising it, you know, so brilliantly, though, in the conception and presentation of this particular art piece. Even letting it, every bit of it, to inspire him, from the text itself to the sound of Joyce reading it, to his own imagination just naturally interpreting it like a dream itself, essentially. And there's this phenomenal interpretive element, you know, to so much of the project, you know, as well as the experimental nature of this, of, you know, discovering what can happen through processes themselves, essentially. And, you know, Rodan was always a master at just letting his experimental muse just guide him, you know, from an unusual non-musical source and just truly transform it into this wonderful immersive soundscape every time. With that, I think we are going to come to the end of our episode of Weird Music there, though. No, another very short one, but, you know, sometimes, no, this is a very short song as well, to be fair, but as mentioned in the beginning, I just really want to explore the works of Steve Rodan so much more and showcase so many of the wonderful facets of his incredible body of work, you know, that he devoted his life to creating. You know, there's so many wonderful albums, you know, within his discography that I want to talk about. And whilst Forms of Paper is an incredibly revered album for the right reasons, I think it perhaps just arguably overshadows the true breadth of Rodan's creativity as an experimental artist. And so I'm hoping that many of you who were drawn into Rodan's world through Forms of Paper, you know, just like I was, to be fair, will find it interesting to discover more about his soundscapes, you know. And I doubt we're going to review everything he's done, but we'll definitely talk about a bunch more of his albums on the show. There's a couple I have physical copies of, and a couple I've got on my Bandcamp collection that I really want to introduce you to. And so, with that, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music then. If you're watching right now, I've made it to this part in the video, then please let me know in the comments what your favourite record by Steve Rodan is. I think I asked that in the last one, to be fair, but yep, any reason to discover more Steve Rodan, right? And so with that, I wish you the best. I hope you take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.